Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, bringing you podcast number 97 here at the Tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. Now, before we begin tonight's podcast, I want to kind of apologize for tonight's podcast, in that we're going to cover another topic regarding Gokaiger. And I've realized that even since day one of this podcast, I've been talking about things in relation to Gokaiger and Super Mega Force. And that's not really by intention. You know, the idea of the Onyx Tavern is to cover everything from Go Ranger to Tokyuger and everything from Mighty Morphin to Super Mega Force. The problem is that some topics kind of lead themselves to more discussion and more debate. Gokaiger is a prime example of that, and of course the American adaptation in Super Mega Force. I think both of them have a lot to go ahead, a lot to discuss, a lot to analyze from them, whether it's the novelty of Gokaiger or it is the ineptitude of Super Mega Force. There's just stuff there. And of course there's too many topics that have been talked about to death and over, and I understand that. But what I hope to go ahead and do tonight is, one, not be redundant, two, not to bore you with another discussion on Gokaiger, but to offer a new perspective on a topic that has been discussed since Gokaiger has come out, and something that I think needs re-examination. And I will go ahead and point out that Gokaiger to me is one of those shows where it's awesome. Don't get me wrong, it's got a great story, it's got great characters, it's got a great premise. But when you think about it for a few minutes, a lot of things just don't seem to add up in the grand scheme of things. Which I think is the failing of Gokaiger, is it's got all this eye candy to it, that when you actually stop and think about what's happening, it just doesn't seem to go ahead and work. And I've covered that before when we talked about the Zords, the greatest treasure in the universe, Aka Red to an extent, and so forth. But tonight I have another topic that stems from a debate I think people have. And it's not even really a debate nowadays. It seems to be an accepted fact, or at least that's how I've read into it. And that is that, you know, when Raptor and I did our most powerful Ranger teams of all time, we had a number of people make the comment that the most powerful Ranger team of all time, or in this case, we're going to use Sentai, the most powerful Sentai team of all time has to be Gokaiger. And the reasoning for that is basically because Gokaiger has the Ranger keys. Therefore, they have access to all the powers of the previous Sentai teams. Therefore, they must be the most powerful because they have access to it all. And I can understand where that line of reasoning comes from. But what I want to go ahead and discuss tonight is why I don't believe that to be the case. Now, this is not an instance of me being a hipster and not liking it because the series is popular. Again, I've gone on record saying that I love the series. I have a bootleg DVD of it, and I collect Ranger keys and all the Zords and stuff. So it's a good show. I'm not debating that. But again, this goes to where you actually put some thought and think about things, they just don't seem to go ahead and mesh. And I want to go ahead and discuss tonight why I personally believe that Gokaiger, and to the extent of Power Rangers Super Mega Force, are not the most powerful Ranger teams within their universe. Now, I will also point out, I'm not really going to discuss Super Mega Force. Super Mega Force is going to be kind of a byproduct of this, because my argument for Gokaiger is going to be based on the nature of the Ranger keys and how they function, where they come from, and things like that. Super Mega Force, even though I've kind of caught up with the episodes, I've seen the final episode as it premiered early in Canada or wherever and all that, I still have questions about the Ranger keys, or the legendary Ranger keys in that particular series. So for the purposes of this discussion, I'm not going to reference Super Mega Force. That will be discussion for another time, but I'd like to think most of what I'm talking about is going to apply to Super Mega Force, assuming the origin of the legendary Ranger keys is not radically different from what we have in Gokaiger. And again, we will get into that, and let's go ahead and talk about it. So as I stated, the reason people think that Gokaiger is the most powerful Ranger team, or Sentai team of all time, is because they have the Ranger keys and they have access to all the previous powers. I'm not buying that argument for a number of reasons. And there are two main points I want to go ahead and make. One, the Ranger keys should not be the access point to every Sentai power. And two, what are the Gokaiger without the Ranger keys? Let's cover the first point here. So, as we established in the first episode of Gokaiger, after the Legendary War, Aka Ranger basically had all the Rangers sacrifice their powers to defeat the Zaniac fleet and destroy them. The powers then dissipated from Earth and somehow formed into keys or were forged into keys by Aka Red, who began the Red Pirate Gang to collect the keys, bring them to Earth, and all that good stuff. And eventually, Captain Marvelous and his crew ended up with the keys, which they used as tools to defeat the Zaniac and ultimately defeat the Emperor and find the greatest treasure in the universe. So I think we're all familiar with the story of the Ranger keys and how they came to be. Now, the misconception, I think, of the Ranger keys is that people assume that the keys actually hold the power of those previous Ranger teams. And I think in a number of cases that is true. One could definitely see an item such as, say, the Dino Metal from Zoo Ranger and their Dino Bucklers, reconstituting into energy or releasing energy and then thus being formed into a key, and that is where the energy is held. It's like a battery in a sense, which is not too far off, I think, from what it actually is. So items like the Dino Metal and all that, or Denzi Manpowers, or the Go-Go 5 morphers, in any of those devices, I could definitely see that the power was released, turned into energy, and they reconstitute it into a key. Because what we see through a number of different shows is that the powers themselves can be utilized by just about anybody. Look at SPD Deca Ranger. Anybody can go ahead and use the morphers. It's passed down. In some shows, it's a generational thing. Look at Shinkanger. That is a generational thing where they do go ahead and pass down their morphers and the folding Zords and all that good stuff. So that stuff does go ahead and happen. And I can definitely see that within the Ranger keys and the Gokaiger being able to access those powers. But there are several Ranger teams or Sentai teams. I don't know what to go ahead and call them. Sentai Ranger, I apologize if I flip back and forth. But there are several teams out there whose powers should not be in the keys. Let's use Jaka for a good example. For those of you who have seen the first episode, or have at least seen the Sentai Origins that Raptor and I did, you will know that Jaka is a team of cyborgs, minus Big One. And in the first episode, they undergo the process to become cyborgs. And I believe the green one, Clover King, is powered by electricity. So he has mechanical parts on his body which are powered by electricity and a power source within himself. When he becomes Clover King, he puts on the suit to disguise him, to protect him, more function more or less like armor. So I wonder, when his Ranger key was formed, what happened to our Clover King, whose name escapes me at the moment? Obviously, he's still a cyborg, isn't he? He's still powered by electricity. But he lost his powers. Well, wait a second. His powers are not actually from the suit, not from the Henshi device that he has. His powers are the fact that he is a cyborg, much in the same way, say, Metallo is a cyborg. His power comes from himself, not anything external. So logically, when we take a look at Jaka, when those keys were formed, that should not actually give the Gokaiger any additional power. It is true that they do give the Jaka weapons, but is Dawn, who typically transforms into Clover King, actually able to access his cyborg powers as electrical power, basically? I don't think so. I think in the instance of Jaka, all they're getting is the suits. Now, that being the case, do the suits actually make the Gokaiger more powerful when they transform into them? I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's what is happening at all. All that is happening in the instance of Jacka is that the Gokaiger are getting their suits. They're not gaining cyborg powers. Captain Marvelous is not gaining a nuclear reactor within his chest to power him up. He is still Captain Marvelous. He is still, well, I would say human, but he's an alien. He's still an alien, whatever his limitations and powers actually are. But he is not Spade Ace or Ace Spade. He does not have the power of nuclear reaction within his body. We do not have the electrical powers within King Clover. We don't have those abilities coming from them, because logically, if they were to take away the cyborg powers of the Jacka, then I think the civilians would be dead, or they would turn back into normal humans. That it doesn't make any sense that would go ahead and happen. Let's move on to another example. Look at Jetman. What was the premise behind Jetman? That the Birdonic waves escaped the station and zapped 4 random civilians who had to be drafted into the Jetman because they possessed the powers. They didn't have any training, they didn't have any expertise, but because the power now resides in their body, they must become the Jetman. Now, it was my understanding from everything I've read about Jetman and the couple episodes I saw that the powers were bonded to them. Okay? So, when the Jetman lose their powers, does that mean the power within their body is removed? Because I didn't think that was actually possible. I thought that was the particular point. And that even brings up questions when we talk about Guy, Black Condor, who is dead. I will have to repeat that a couple of times. He is dead. And therefore, if he brings on a corporeal being, does it still have the Jetman powers, or do they expire when his body expires? There are a number of questions in regard to that and raising the dead, as we've pointed out in numerous videos. But the fact remains, if the Jetman suits, that just allows them to fly. That's the only thing it does. And the Gokaiger have done that on a number of occasions where they have used the Jetman suits to fly and for their weapons. So again, that does happen. But I doubt Marvelous and Luca and Joe and all those guys, I doubt they're getting the powers of the Birdonic waves. Because, again, that would have to be removed from the bodies of the Jetman and then put into the bodies of the Gokaiger. Now, you could argue it goes into their suits, but again, what happens to the Jetman? Again, I would assume that they lose their powers when that happens. It's not really explained. And I'll go on to a third example right here. I've actually started watching Die Ranger, and I'm about third of the way through, maybe a little bit more than that. And as is described in several episodes, the power of the Die Ranger comes from their ki, or their chi, however you want to go ahead and look at it, which is their inner essence, their soul, for a very simplistic example right there. Even so, when they got Kiba Ranger, he's using his ki, that his energy and his essence. That's how he's able to get those girls' skirts to fly up, is because he was using his inner ability. That was not a Kiba Ranger ability exactly. So that all being said, the power comes from within them. This is another case where the suit is an extra protection, and yes, they are using external objects such as their little spheres, whose name escapes me at the moment, to help focus their energy. So what happens when the Ranger keys are formed? Take a look at Lynn, who is the Ho-Ho Ranger. The thing about her is she has actually been shown on a number of occasions in the show to summon her wind abilities and use it to unlock doors, oddly enough, without transforming to Ho-Ho Ranger. So when she loses her Ho-Ho Ranger abilities, first of all, what abilities is she losing? And second of all, does she still have her wind powers even though she's not morphed and she doesn't have the Henshin device anymore? That's a very odd question. Because if you want to follow the route that I've been going, then reasonably the Gokaiger should not have the same abilities as the Die Ranger. Yes, they can have their suits, they can have their weapons and so forth, but they shouldn't have their wind abilities or phantom star abilities or gravity abilities. Those are abilities that come from them and have been utilized on several occasions outside of their morphing abilities, much like civilian powers. This would be the same thing as saying that if the Super Mega Force, and I know this isn't the case, but this is an example that I want to use, saying that Super Mega Force, when they change into SPD, that they can that they can use the different abilities of the SPD civilian powers, such as turning your hand into any material that you touch, or replicating and duplicating yourself. We know that doesn't happen in Super Mega Force because those are civilian powers that belong to the SPD Rangers. The morphing is just an extra armor, gives them protection and different abilities such as SWAT. The same thing is true of the Die Ranger, the Jet Band, the Jacka powers. Those powers come from within their bodies. That is what makes them powerful. The suits are just a covering to protect their identity, to allow them to fly, to let them take on damage without getting hurt by lasers. That's what the suits are designed for. But by the logic of Gokaiger, what they're saying is, we have the power of Jetman because we have the key, therefore we must have Birdonic waves. Now, I haven't heard anybody actually say that, but that seems to be the implication. They're trying to say in the argument that Gokaiger is the most powerful because they can turn into the previous Ranger teams, that they can have those powers because they can turn into them, where logically they should not. So, in this first point, I don't think they're the most powerful because they're not gaining their powers. Jacka are powerful because they are cyborgs. Jetman are powerful because they have Birdonic waves, and Die Rangers powerful because of their ki or chi. Those powers could not and should not be transferred to the Gokaiger. Again, when they change into Jacka, all they should get is a suit and weapons. And even when you look at Die Ranger, how many of their weapons are actually powered by their ki? And actually, that's a very good question that I have. The circular blades that the Die Ranger have, you'll actually notice when you watch Die Rangers that they use their ki to launch them. It's not like magnets, or it's not using anything else. And yet the Die Ranger the Gokaiger, when they turn to Die Ranger, are able to do the same thing, but logically they should not. So did they acquire the key? They really shouldn't. And of course you can argue they're using their own key, but that's something the Die Rangers had been mastering throughout the series with meditation and battle. And considering that the Die Ranger keys were not used all that often, are you really telling me that the Gokaiger were able to master their own key and use these powers? Plus, I also find it very suspicious that they have similar fighting styles to the Die Ranger in that one episode. That should also not be happening. So I think I've said enough on this first point, because again, by saying that you have the keys, therefore you have the powers, I think is wrong, because again, a lot of those keys give you the costume, but logically should not give you the powers of those particular teams. But the other argument I'd like to go ahead and make is, what if the Gokaiger do not have the Ranger keys? What a lot of people don't seem to be able to separate with the Gokaiger is that the Ranger keys, outside the Gokaiger keys, are not part of their normal arsenal and do not continue to be a part of their normal arsenal. And what do I mean by that? Obviously, before Akared was able to start gathering the keys, there were 5 Gokaiger keys out there. We know this for a fact. Those keys were there. They had gun, swords, and they had their own Zords. That was the limit of their abilities. The Ranger keys were artificially created from other power sources to supplement the Gokaiger. And frankly, their purpose were not to serve the Gokaiger. I suppose, again, this goes back to my theories on Akared, that Akared made them into a small form that could be accessible. Why he turned them into keys that would fit into the Mobius devices, again, that's a whole different story. The point that I'm making here is that these keys are artificially created and are used in an artificial way for the Gokaiger when they do the Gokai change. But what happens at the end of the series is very interesting. Marvelous decides to give all the keys back to all the previous Sentai. And the closing scenes of the episode, or of the season, is all the keys going back to their previous Rangers. We see it go back to Akka Ranger, Tema Ranger, and Kruger. They all get their keys back. And so when the Gokaiger fly off into space, we know All they have is the 5 Ranger keys plus Guy's key, which was also made artificially in a dream state, basically. So, if the Gokaiger were to return, and I'll talk about the movie here in a minute, the Go Buster Gokaiger crossover movie in a second. When they come back, they no longer have access to the Ranger keys. They only have their keys. And when they don't have the other Ranger keys, what good are they? Now, don't get me wrong. They're obviously a good fighting force, and they have developed their own weapons, but they no longer have access to the keys or the greater powers or the Zords that go with that. Need I remind you, the way that they access Mach Falcon, or Malkion, is by using the Go-Onger keys to summon him from the machine world. Well, if the Gokaiger no longer have the Go-Onger keys, well, they can't summon him, can they? If they don't have the Hurricaneger keys, they can't summon the Hurricaneger. If they don't have the Gao Ranger keys, they cannot summon the Gao Lion anymore. When they no longer have access to these keys, they can't call upon their Zords. Also, Guy uses Time Fire, Abari Killer, and Dragon Ranger keys to power the Gojujin, which also comes from the future, and he has to summon using one of the keys. So if all he has by the end of the series is the Gokai Silver key, he can't call his own Zord. That seems like a big handicap on him. Plus, he can't use Gold Mode. Gold Mode is predicated on the fact that he has to use 15 6th Ranger keys to form it. If he doesn't have those keys, he can no longer access Gold Mode. Now, I know you're all going to say about the movie, and I'll bring that up. Did anybody else notice that it's a contrivance in the film? There's a scene in the beginning where the Gokaiger fighting the Go Buster. Guy comes up in the Gojujin, somehow, saying that he has Ranger keys, and he gives them to the Gokaiger. Well, that reasonably should not be happening. I mean, we are to believe that Guy went to the previous Sentai Rangers and say, hey, can you give us your Ranger keys? Which should not be Ranger keys anymore. If they've returned to their owner, I would assume that they have returned to their normal state or repowered the Dino Metal or any of those particular devices. But Guy somehow is able to get these keys and give them to the Gokaiger, and somehow was able to obtain the Time Fire, Abari Killer, and Dragon Ranger keys again, from dead people, I mind you, and get the Gojujin so that he could go use it to go get the other keys. And of course that brings up the question is what's happening to the keys that go to dead people. But I guess in that you can say, Guy may have kept dead people keys. I mean, that makes a lot more sense than saying the key went to heaven. Nevertheless, we have a contrivance in this film to give them these powers to transform into Geki Ranger 5-man and all those different teams that we see within the movie, which reasonably should not be happening. What happens, this is something of a hypothetical, but what happens when we get to the 40th anniversary? And let's say we have the Legendary War Mark II. And the Gokaiger are going to be in there because they are the 35th Sentai. They don't have access to the Ranger keys. So they're only going to have access to their weapons and what they've been able to go ahead and create, such as the cannon and their own ship. At that point, can you say that the Gokaiger are the most powerful Sentai team? Because when they actually are with other Sentai teams, they don't have their powers anymore. They cannot have the powers of the other Sentai teams because there they are next to them. So if you squared off, say, Gokaiger versus Magi Ranger to see who's more powerful, well, you can't say that the Gokaiger will win that because they have Ranger keys to counteract that. No, the Gokaiger have to be able to defeat the Magi Ranger on their own without any keys. And I think that's what people are not really understanding about the Gokaiger, that they think that they always have access to the keys, that they always have those available to them. Granted, there are teams out there that lose their powers, lose their weapons, lose their Zords. That's not in dispute here. But the way people view Gokaiger is that they will always have the keys, and therefore they will always be the most powerful because they always will have the keys. And I think that's a fallacy in thought. The Gokaiger have to be evaluated based on what they have at any given time. And if you get all the Sentai Rangers together, plus the Gokaiger cannot turn into those other people. They just can't go ahead and do it. And I don't want to see it when we get to future installments of movies and crossovers and anniversary specials. I don't want to see them Gokai change again. Because frankly, it's going to be a contrivance. Because let's say we get, again, I'm going to use the 40th anniversary as a hypothetical example here. Let's say the Gokaiger make appearance in there, and they're able to change into 5-man. Okay, you're able to change into 5-man. How did you get the keys? How did you get those keys? Did you go to the 5-man? Did you locate them and say, hey, we need your powers again? And we saw how some teams aren't really big on letting the Gokaiger have their powers. I mean, it took the Gokaiger entire movie to persuade them to do so. Which, to me, I think was stupid, because the Gokaiger should have teamed up the Gokaiger, and the rest of the series should have been Gokaiger and Gokaiger fighting alongside each other. But that's a different story for a different time. What I'm trying to get at here, and I'd like to think I've made clear, Gokaiger is not the most powerful Sentai team based on the reasons and the logic that most people are giving. That because they can transform to any previous team does not mean they always have that ability, nor should make them powerful. Because again, the keys are not always going to be there, should not always be there, because the keys exist only within the season. When we do future Gokaiger adventures, that should actually not be a part of their arsenal unless you contrive a way just so we can get these changes. Frankly, if they ever did a sequel Sentai to Gokaiger, I would love to see them do the season without Gokai changes. Then we can actually see how well they function. Because can you honestly say that the Gokaiger would have won and defeated the Zaniac if they didn't have the Ranger keys? And yes, I know it was to get to the ultimate treasure of the universe, but let's forget that for the moment. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that they were trying to get to the greatest treasure of the universe, and the previous 34 Sentai powers were not necessary to obtain it. And they didn't have the Ranger keys, and their origins are slightly different. So that could possibly be done. So you have Marvelous and his gang flying through space. Could they have defeated the Zaniac without the Ranger keys? I honestly don't think so. I think because they were able to access Zords at key places, they were able to use certain powers against certain enemies. The fact that Guy was able to get a custom-made key from dead Sentai Rangers and form the gold key, that they actually used the Go-Andra powers to summon a machine from Machine World. Those were all lucky breaks in the grand scheme of things. They were not necessarily powers that the Gokaiger themselves were able to attain. Yes, they were smart, and yes, they had to do things without the powers, but I think if you took all those powers away, the Gokaiger probably could not beat the Zaniac. Although, given it's a Sentai series, they would eventually have to. So no, I do not think the Gokaiger is the most powerful series based on what I said, because again, they don't always have access to the keys, and the powers they supposedly have should not be there. I go back to Jacka, Jetman, and Die Ranger. Those are 3 prime examples of powers they should not go ahead and have. Because I doubt those Ranger keys are turning them into cyborgs every time that they use them. That just doesn't make any sense. And if I may go on a quick tangent right here, the Megazord keys make even less sense. You can say it's non-canon, you can say that it happens in alternate universe, or wherever you want to go ahead and say, but the Megazord keys, for one, are also not part of their arsenal, so I don't want to hear the argument that, well, they can pull out the Megazord keys and turn into the Thunder Megazord whenever they want. No, that was something used for the movie. That's something they do not have as part of their normal arsenal, so I don't want to hear that argument. But with the Megazord keys, it's amazing how the keys can actually warp machines into whatever it is they're turning them into. Because I just find it odd that the cockpit stays the same and the controls stay the same for both the Go Buster and Gokaiger, but the entire outside is changed, mass is expanding, contracting. I can do a whole video on that, but the Megazord keys, they just don't make any sense. So, to finish out, let's give a last call right here. I still maintain that most likely the most powerful Sentai or Power Ranger team out there is probably the Magi Ranger Mystic Force. And I say that because they have a basis in magic and their abilities are quite wondrous, quite powerful, and we compare them to their villains. I think in most cases they are the most powerful team out there. Granted, I haven't seen all the Sentai out there, but I'm willing to bet that at least Mystic Force is probably the most powerful Power Ranger team. Give me a little time on the Sentai, maybe I'll change my opinion of that. But based on the logic people have given me, Gokaiger is not the most powerful team, and I think their reason is dubious. I really do. Because it has to be some ability that you always have, that you've acquired and you've kept for yourself. Because it just seems to me that we're trying to say that they're uber powerful, that they're all powerful, almost like a Superman kind of thing where they're gaining new powers all the time. Not that they are, but it's like, well, Superman can do 50 different things at once, because super speed, ice breath, laser vision, super hearing, things like that, that we're kind of applying that to Gokaiger in the fact that because they have the keys, they can do anything, and because they have, I guess in that case, a near omnipotent level of power, therefore they should be the most powerful out there. And I don't think that's the case. I think that when we evaluate Gokaiger, we need to look at on the merits of what it is as a show and who they are as a team. Because again, one of the things I said at the beginning of the series is there is a novelty to the series, that we are distracted by the Gokai changes so much that we don't particularly think about the consequences of those changes. And again, I have never heard anybody bring up the Jacka discussion. Nobody has ever said that they should not have the powers of Jacka, they should only have their costumes. And again, what greater power does Jacka have exactly? We know they have it, but I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what it is because they're cyborgs. So is it the power of cyborgs exactly? And how does that transfer over? Again, I've gone into that in enough detail, I think. But I'm very curious on what you guys think. First of all, those of you out there who believe that the Gokaiger are the most powerful because of those reasons, do you agree with my assessment here? Did I thoroughly explain it? Did I leave anything out? Was I able to change your mind on the thing? Not that I'm going to force you to change your mind, but I want you to think about it. Really think about what the Gokaiger are without the Ranger keys, which are not part of their permanent arsenal. And for those of you who've never thought about it, what do you think about it? Do you think the Gokaiger are the most powerful? Do I make a legitimate point? I really want to hear your comments on the matter. So, again, I think I've rambled on enough. I've discussed on this topic. But, again, let me know what you guys think. Please leave a comment in the section below. And let's see what happens in the comment discussion. Maybe we'll find out who truly the most powerful team is based on your all suggestions. Well, I just want to thank you guys for listening to me again. You all have yourself a good night. And the tavern is now closed.